This monstrous story, which occurred in 2005, shocked the whole of Britain with its cruelty. A young girl, who by the age of 18 had managed to build a successful modeling career, was found 10 meters from the door of her own house. The police spent enormous resources trying to find a culprit, and only a tiny DNA sample helped them in their case. Sally Bowman was born on September 11, 1987 in London. She grew up in a large family. She had 3 older sisters. Later her parents Linda and Paul developed, but the girl continued to maintain a good relationship with her father. Sally was a cheerful and friendly girl with a big heart. At the same time, she was also very responsible. Already in her teens, she got a job and moved into rented housing. The girl did not want to be financially dependent on her parents, but continued to see her family regularly. Sally later entered the prestigious London School of Performing Arts and Technology. Sally dreamed of working as a model, and the fact that she was able to enter this school was a big step towards her cherished goal. After graduating from school in 2004, the girl worked for some time as a hairdresser and model, but already in January 2005, she got a job at the London modeling agency Pulse Model Management. From the first few months, Sally made impressive progress in her new job. She became the face of the popular watch brand Swatch, and also took part in prestigious fashion shows. As a result, by the age of 18, she managed to build a very successful career. On Saturday, September 24, 2005, Sally went to visit her mother and spent most of the day at her home. Later, her older sister Nicole called her and invited her to her best friend's birthday party. Sally agreed and left her mother's house at about 6 p.m. At 10 p.m., the girl met her sister and friends at Lloyd's Bar in the center of Croydon. CCTV footage from the bar showed Sally having a great time. The company had fun, talked and danced. At approximately 1 a.m., Sally left the bar with her sister. They walked to her house, but the girl did not stay there for long. On the way, she phoned her ex-boyfriend Lewis Sportston and agreed to meet him in the center of Croydon. At about 3:30, she got into a taxi and drove to the appointed place. During the meeting, a quarrel occurred between them. They broke up just a few weeks ago due to mutual complaints, and since then they have been trying to sort out the situation to no avail. Lewis decided to take her home on Blenheim Crescent, and they continued to quarrel all the way. The couple sorted things out until about 4:15 a.m., after which Sally got out of the car and headed home. Around the same time, the neighbors were awakened by an incomprehensible noise, which gave way to screaming. People ran to the window, but nothing suspicious was happening on the street. 5 minutes later, they only saw an unknown man walking down the street. At about 6:30 in the morning, one of the neighbors came out of the house and noticed something strange. A nearby construction container revealed what he initially thought were the legs of a mannequin. But as soon as the neighbor came closer, a terrible sight awaited him. There lay the half-naked body of a dead girl. She turned out to be Sally Bowman. The police quickly arrived at the scene and sealed off the area, and I managed to find the murder weapon. However, later experts found the DNA of an unknown man on the girl's body. They also found that Sally had been stabbed at least 7 times with a sharp object and had been abused. The unknown maniac even left several bite marks on her body. Sally's family was devastated by the news. When her mom heard the drain on the door this morning, she thought that Sally had come home. But there were policemen on the doorstep who informed her about the murder of her daughter. Within a few hours, Sally's mother and sister had to go to the morgue for identification. They hoped to the last that it was all one big mistake and Sally was actually alive. It wasn't until they saw her body that they realized it was really her. Meanwhile, the police have launched investigations, and the first thing they did was run a DNA sample from the girl's body through the databases. But this did not help them identify the criminal. There were also no cameras in that area, which only made the work more difficult. Investigators determined that Sally was killed just 10 meters from the door of her home. Her journey from the car to the building was also very short. The attacker must have attacked her almost immediately after she left the car. The first thing the police suspected was her ex-boyfriend. He was the last person to see Sally, and her murder occurred almost immediately after she got out of the car. In addition, investigators found that the couple had often quarreled in the past. Several times it even came to the point of calling the police, but no one brought any charges. The same day the police tracked him down and arrested him. During interrogation, he stated that he did not even know about Sally's death until the detectives themselves told him about it. He admitted that there had indeed been an argument between them that night, but denied any involvement in the murder. According to his version, as soon as Sally got out of the car, he drove away. Investigators were in no hurry to take the guy at his word, since everything really looked not in his favor. He was held in custody for 4 days while detectives awaited the results of a DNA test. Ultimately, it turned out that his DNA did not match the sample, and Lewis was released. At the same time, experts discovered another interesting detail. The DNA sample found on Sally's body was involved in a 4-year-old criminal case. In 2001, a woman called from a telephone booth located in the parking lot of a store. At some point, a man entered the booth, undressed, and committed lewd acts. He did not touch the woman and ran away, but left marks on the floor of the booth. The victim contacted the police and a DNA test sample was attached to the case. However, the culprit was never found. All this happened not so far from the place of Sally's murder, 2.5 kilometers. The police realized that they were dealing with a serial pervert who had been operating for several years. The only question was how many girls had suffered at the hands of this maniac and when he would strike next. It was up to the detective to find him before he ruined anyone else's life. Rather, it turned out that the police's fears were not in vain. Just an hour before Sally was killed, a woman was attacked on a nearby street. She was walking home, talking on her cell phone. At some point, a man approached her, apologized, and immediately struck her. The woman screamed and dropped her phone. But then something happened that the attacker clearly did not expect. A taxi car appeared on the road and it scared him away. He grabbed the victim's phone and fled. Luckily, the driver heard the scream and stopped. He put the woman in the car and took her to the hospital. There she called the police and told what happened. According to her description, the attacker was a white man, 25 to 30 years old, about 180 centimeters tall with short dark hair. Based on these data, the police compiled a composite photo, which was published in the media. Unfortunately, a large number of men fit this vague description, so detectives received hundreds of calls from local residents. They all said that the identikit looked like someone they knew, or that they had seen a similar person somewhere. Each such call was checked by the police, but this did not bring any results. Realizing that it would be impossible to find the maniac using an identikit, investigators decided to take a different path. Their only lead was a DNA sample found on the victim's body. In addition, detectives were confident that the perpetrator lived in the area. This was evidenced by the fact that he also attacked a woman in a telephone booth on a nearby street. As a result, it was decided to conduct DNA screening of the entire region. The police officer would go into each apartment and house, ask questions, and ask residents to voluntarily provide their DNA samples. Of course, the detectives did not hope that the criminal would give them his DNA, but it was enough for them to obtain a sample from his relatives to get closer to catching the culprit. For example, this man could live with parents who do not know about his atrocities and willingly provide his DNA to the police. Over the next 6 months, police officers visited more than 6,000 addresses. Many residents of the area provided their DNA samples, but the entire operation came to nothing. Despite the efforts of law enforcement agencies, they did not find any matches with the criminal's sample. All this time, the population of Croydon was growing in fear, and police patrols only increased the anxiety. They all knew that a maniac was operating on their streets. Women were afraid to walk in the dark. Parents did not let their children go for walks. As a result, the police had to return to the sketch, since there was nothing else to work with. The updated sketch was not very different from the previous one and was too generalized. Thousands of men living in this area came under it, but then something happened that no one expected. A completely random breakthrough in this matter. A man was sitting at a bar watching football. After drinking heavily, he began to argue with one of the visitors, and soon their conflict escalated into a brawl on the street. Unfortunately for him, the moment he pushed his opponent to the ground, a policeman was passing by. He detained the attacker and took him to the station. Something strange began there. The instigator of the conflict, 35-year-old Mark Dixie, fell into a real panic and almost cried. This was very illogical behavior, since he was detained for a minor offense. Most likely, his opponent would not have brought any charges, and the man could safely go home. The police considered him very suspicious, but they soon had to release him on bail. Before this, they carried out the standard procedure for all detainees. They took his fingerprints and a DNA sample. 12 days have passed. The detective received a call from the laboratory, and the experts made an unexpected statement. Mark Dixie's DNA matches the sample found on Sally's body. The investigators realized that they had a dangerous maniac in their hands, but they let him go. In any case, the law would not have allowed him to be kept longer, and now the police had to rearrest the criminal. Unfortunately for them, Dixie fled to Amsterdam immediately after his release. The British authorities put him on the wanted list, but the man successfully escaped. This went on for 3 months until something strange happened. The criminal quarreled with the owner of the apartment he was renting in Amsterdam and returned back to England. Moreover, he returned to his previous job, making the work of the police much easier. On June 28, 2006, almost a year after the murder, he was finally arrested, and this time he was accused of a whole series of serious crimes. After studying his biography, the police found out that Mark has a very rich criminal history. He committed his first crime in 1986, when he was 16 years old. He attacked a woman with a knife, robbed her, and committed indecent assault. He was sentenced to only 6 months in prison due to his age. Each subsequent year, Mark was again put on trial for robbery and harassment, and in 1990 he was arrested for assaulting a police officer. Unfortunately, all these times the judicial system was favorable to him. Unfortunately, in those years the police did not yet collect DNA samples from criminals. The police had a lot of work to do before taking the case to court. They found out that on the night of Sally's murder, Dixie celebrated his birthday at a bar with friends. He had an argument with his girlfriend over the phone and spent the rest of the evening abusing alcohol and illegal substances. He closed himself off and barely communicated with anyone. After the bar closed, Mark and his 2 girlfriends went to a house nearby. After waiting for them to fall asleep, the man took a knife and went outside. According to investigators, it was he who attacked the girl, who was saved by the taxi driver. Fearing that she would call the police, Mark went to another street. Unfortunately, it was at that moment that Sally Bowman got out of the car and walked towards her door. He attacked her, subjected her to violence, and fled. Apparently, it was his neighbors who saw him walking down the street from their windows that night. After killing Sally, he returned back to the apartment and calmly went to bed. The trial of Mark Dixie began on February 5, 2008. He refused to admit his guilt, which led to him inventing a truly ridiculous story. According to the version, he was just walking down the street and saw Sally lying on the ground. Taking advantage of the situation, he subjected her to violence and left, and someone else killed the girl. Dixie stated that he allegedly did not know that the girl was dead. During the trial, a woman from Australia was also found who was attacked by Dixie in 1998. He subjected her to violence and stabbed her 7 times, but was never punished. The jury unanimously found Dixie guilty of Sally's murder, despite his ridiculous story. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum prison term of 34 years. After that, he was transferred several times from one prison to another, because each time his fellow inmates mocked him and tried to kill him. All this time, Mark continued to deny his involvement in the murder, and only in 2015, 10 years later, he confessed. His situation did not worsen from this, but the police managed to prove his involvement in other crimes.